Welcome, everyone. My name is Nina Benoit. I'm the Director of Systemity at Brightest, host of the AI Systemity podcast, and keynote speaker on AI and sustainability. For first time listeners, this podcast talks about all things related to artificial intelligence and sustainability, exploring how AI can have a positive impact on our planet and our people, and what potential limitations or risks we need to be aware of. Today, I'm very happy to welcome Steve Diasio. Steve is a TEDx speaker, founder of the School of Creativity and Innovation, and an award-winning professor of entrepreneurship and innovation. He has spent decades at the intersection of creativity, emerging technology, and human-centered design, including faculty roles at the University of South Florida and advisory board positions at institutions like the USF Center for Entrepreneurship and Harvard Business Review. Steve, thank you so much for being here today on the SMT podcast. I've really been looking forward to this conversation, as creativity, AI, and sustainability don't always end up in the same room.
Nina, it's an honor to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
It's a pleasure. So, Steve, before we get into your work, you have a PhD in management science. You worked with IBM and Nokia. You founded the School of Creativity and Innovation. How does someone with this background end up in the world of sustainability and community design?
It was a journey. And one of the early on, there's a broader conversation happening locally in the communities that I've been a part of. And there was a misconception about sustainability in that it's deeply tied to environmental sciences. In reality, sustainability is deeply connected to the human design systems and relationships, if it's cities or their wider communities or even futures. So my journey started in this area of technology and innovation, and I worked around emerging technologies during periods of significant disruption, not so different than what we're dealing with today. And this was happening at mass scale. And what fascinated me with the organizations that I was working with was that they were focusing on the technology, but in reality, it was the human response to that change that was more important for the adoption, if it was of the technology or if its impact. So uh, I was curious to understand more about why do some communities adapt and thrive in this change, if it's around sustainability or technology, and why some fractures, and then how does innovation help create belonging while others seem to be more extractionist. So my time at IBM was exciting because they were these early pioneers of trying to solve these grand challenges, if it's climate change, ending world poverty, or providing access to clean drinking water. And they were using the tools of innovation, particularly inventing and using this technology in a new way for new models and innovation around what they were framing as an innovation jam, and building this platform where the idea was a large group of people can collectively organize to solve a challenging business or societal problem better than individual experts or groups of experts. And they were using this emerging technology to try to aggregate bits of information from very diverse sources and a range of people around the world to address these challenges. And complementing these experiences were my studies and work around brilliant researchers in Barcelona, Paris, and London. So they helped grow my perspective and grow my heart to see how different places were looking to solve these challenges and offer different tools and perspectives. So through these examples, my curiosity built and eventually led to building and understanding tools of design thinking, entrepreneurship, corporate innovation, and then founding the School of Creativity and Innovation, which was tied to these broader themes that I saw and emerging around creative problem solving. And they were viewing maybe or slow to adopt creative problem solving because of this stigma around creativity or myth that it's artists or this creative genius. And creativity to me is about the ability to reimagine these big systems when the current ones no longer serve us. And because sustainability is fundamentally a design challenge, how we recreate cities, recreate future processes, and it impacts economically, socially, culturally, and how to improve that through different over generations as well. So it was a combination of this journey of technology, innovation, seeing the diverse approaches to solving these grand challenges, and then being at that intersection.
Thank you so much for sharing. And so you mentioned the School of Creativity and Innovation. And so I'm wondering what gap were you seeing in how people and organization approach creative problem solving that made you feel that you needed to create that school?
I was fortunate to work in a time where there was significant technological disruption. Again, not so different than today. And the organizations and companies that I was helping consult with were struggling with the tools and the processes. And it was
Mhm.
very clear early on, there was definitely not a system. Everything was knee jerk, ad hoc, maybe project based, but there was not a clear, deep knowledge set in these organizations. So that was early on in my motivation to see change. And if there was better tools for leaders and better tools for managers, and so I went on that journey to help create some. However, the School of Creativity and Innovation was born, through a broader journey, but the consistent feedback that I was receiving from organizations and the leaders and executives that I was teaching saying, Steve, these are the tools we need more of because we're on the front lines constantly dealing with change, ambiguity, uncertainty. We're being demanded to do more with less. We're expected to solve these problems rapidly. And so these executives were saying, we want more of this. And we were wrapped it around kind of unique or different type of pedagogy around immersive learning. And this has happened over the 15 years. So they were encouraging me to build this out more. So through this work, I kept seeing that organizations and leaders were struggling or viewing these challenges and trying to approach it more like a machine problem opposed to a human problem. They would say, we're buying this software, we might test this lab thing, or consistently hire consultants. But underneath, people were still operating in this old world of problem solving, old world of doing things. If it's fear, if it's silos, or definitely this outdated command and control top-down system structure. So
Mhm.
they weren't tapping into this creative problem solving or this creativity that's found on the individual, group, organizational level, and weren't treating it as a luxury, or they were treating it as a luxury and not part of the infrastructure. So when you look at the challenges today, if it's change or adoption, to address that, or housing, or even social trust, these aren't strictly are not going to be strictly solved through linear problem solving. They require a unique imagination, unique collaboration, and definitely ability to navigate within uncertainty. So that's how the School of Creativity and Innovation was born, out of this need and encouragement from the leaders that I was training and that I was working with. So we're trying to move from these old assumptions around creativity or the old silos and help them rediscover creativity in themselves, in their group, best practices for problem solving tied with corporate innovation tools around immersive training and learning, and move them from passive observers to active creators with more relevant tools.
Mhm. And so, of course, today, one of the disruption we are facing is AI, right?
Yeah.
And so you use AI to turn people's story into visual prototypes for of the future they want to see. Could you walk us through example of how you're leveraging that resource in St. Pete in Florida?
For me, this is one of the most exciting and hopeful applications of AI right now. There's a lot of fear out there, and we often think about AI in terms of if it's connected to cities around surveillance, maybe traffic optimization, predictive analytics. But in St. Pete, I tried to push that boundary and connect AI to civic infrastructure. So we created a provocative question. What if AI can help communities visualize their own futures before someone else decides it for them?
Hmm.
And we're in a unique situation here. There's a project right across the street from my house. It's say 86 acres that's of prime real estate in the center of the city, one of the largest redevelopment, urban redevelopment in the US initiatives happening. And this neighborhood was historically tied to the local African American community with unique history and cultural significance. However, 40 years ago, in the name of progress, they leveled the whole community, displaced businesses, homes, families, in the name of building a baseball stadium surrounded by a lot of parking lots with the promise of economic development. So there's an enormous amount of social and economic pressure surrounding this redevelopment, but there's also emotional and historic ties that challenge some of the traditional, or provide opportunities to challenge the traditional process of planning that often fails to capture some of these unique dynamics and the wants and needs of today, tomorrow, and the future. So what we did was we organized community design sprints, and we brought together residents, developers, special interest groups, financiers, local government, and we brought them together to help sh- help the residents create these lived experiences and stories of the past, the present, and the future of what they want to see in this urban redevelopment. So these stories were of businesses that once existed, where the stories were about displacement, but the stories were also about building safety, mobility, green parks, how to manage the heat here in Florida, the unique cultural attributes that we have here, affordability, and most importantly, the thread was we want a community and whatever's developed to create a sense of belonging for everyone.
Mhm.
So instead of treating these stories as simple kind of comments that are often happen in the development process or the urban development process, we treated them as design intelligence. We said that these groups, the residents, the special, have deep knowledge and they know what they want in the future. Plus, it's connecting to our past. So we use a variety of AI tools and began this reoccurring theme of translating their stories, their wants, their needs into conceptual visual prototypes. If it's visuals, images, videos, briefs, and assets that can be taken and utilized back into the urban design process to clarify what the community wants and needs are now,
Mm.
and to reduce complexity in translating their wants into actionable plans for future lived experiences. So suddenly the residents went from kind of an afterthought in considering their ideas and brought them into a co-creator or collaborative where ideas emerge almost in real time and continuous feedback. So the government officials can actually see what they want and how they want that to evolve. And the developers and the financiers can start thinking about how these projects from acre to acre or block by block could be developed to create that sense of a belonging through the lens of sustainability, because that was one of the key themes that was interwoven. If it's green walkways, community gardens, rooftop gardens, mixed use hubs, and trying to communicate that historically through just comments doesn't
Mhm.
overly capture the dynamic needs, wants, and visions that they have for the future. And we also had something unique because a few years ago, we got hit by some really bad hurricanes to an extent where it ripped the roof off of the baseball stadium and flooded a lot of the community. So resilience was elevated as a result and being embedded more deeply into these visuals, into these prototypes,
Mhm.
into the wider conversation of how it can be tied to the infrastructure, the building, but interwoven into the cultural and economic assets and thread that will be developed through this urban development. So we saw technology accelerate these and raise the conversation as a result. So it didn't replace the voices, it helped amplify the voices. And I
Mhm.
think this is kind of a unique way of using AI and its infrastructure to build, reduce complexity, increase clarity and make the community greater part of that collaboration and process.
Absolutely. And I think there's also an interesting cost component here, right? Because if the city had to pay for, someone to create videos or images, it would be extremely costly, right? And they probably wouldn't do it.
Yeah, or they may not have the capacity, or they have to think about the consultants or groups that they would need to hire, and maybe they're still working these outdated models of town halls where you have one person leading a facilitation of thousands of people. And how do you really capture the wants, needs, desires, and complexity of the
Mhm.
past, the present, and what they want of the future? So um, I think it was a unique way to build a prototype, an example of how we can take the tools that we have that are relatively cost effective, tie it with the unique way of using design thinking or community sprints, and to accelerate that process, or at least create better assets to help refine the requirements for these developers, for these financiers, and for educating maybe a broader community and even in government to be able to execute what the community wants and needs.
Exactly. And I think this is very unique. So I'm looking forward to seeing this project come to life for sure. And so there's an argument that AI itself carries a real environmental cost, of course. So using it to advocate for sustainability can be contradicting. What do you think about that trade-off, and what's your answer to that critique?
This is an important question, and we need to talk openly and honestly about it. AI absolutely has an environmental cost: energy use, water consumption, data infrastructure. Those are all real concerns, and we shouldn't minimize them. But I have to think of another question, or a second question, um, around what is the civic and environmental cost of poor decision making. So we start seeing that there is this tension and pulling and pushing uh, of these dynamics, because an unsustainable urban development also consumes enormous resources. And if we're making poor decisions that amplify those uses, we're almost like in the same problem or challenge. So
Hmm.
failed planning, lawsuits, stalled projects, poor development, distrust in the communities and institutions, inefficient infrastructure, the displacement maybe, and maybe adversarial redevelopment all carry deep environmental and social costs. So while we can look at one cost and we can maybe easily quantify the AI cost environmentally, um, if we ignore the other costs, it's not an apples and apples comparison. So what excites me about this responsible AI, or what I would frame as making better collective decisions, the community design sprint allowed us to rapidly create these prototypes, allow us to better visualize what we want, create maybe and we'll say elevate the conversation around sustainability, around greenery, around resilience, that can better integrate into the development, into the housing, into the proper planning, so we could reap benefits as a result, even if we're using AI right now. But it reduces that complexity. It creates more transparency that might not be there. And if we didn't use it, it would, some of these conversations would be relegated to after the decisions were made, or we might not be utilizing sustainability best practices in this development, because we can easily marginalize communities or voices, and so this helped amplify it. So now it's being taken, included into the briefs, included into the development, and that has significant economic value today, 5 years, and 10 years. So that's the meaningful use of technology, amplifying the voice, um, not ignoring that there's costs of using AI, but helping strengthen the public value through the use of these tools and amplifying those voices, reducing complexity, but raising clarity as a result. So it's not just about carbon reduction, it's about designing systems for people, culture, economy, and environment that thrive together, and that might be more cost effective by implementing these design sustainability tools and infrastructure over time to reduce other costs. So that's the future I'm interested in building.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. We're coming to an end of this episode. I feel like we could go on for a lot longer, but I think you provided a really good answer, and I absolutely agree with you that it might have a short-term impact, but long-term the benefits will be greater. So Steve, thank you so much for this conversation. I really appreciate you sharing your vision and for the work you're doing to putting the communities at the heart of how we design a more sustainable future.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Keep up the great work.
Thank you so much. And to everyone listening, if this episode resonated with you, please like and share it with someone in your network who cares about sustainability, innovation, and the role of AI in solving real-world challenges. Make sure to follow the podcast so you don't miss future episodes, and feel free to connect with Steve or with myself on LinkedIn to continue the conversation. My name is Nina Benoit, and this is the AI Sustainability Podcast. Thanks for tuning in, and see you next time.